Greetings to you and welcome to our latest episode, this episode that I recorded with Sarah Sovereign. Many of you will already be probably familiar with who she is and her work as not only a photographer but also a counselor now, and all of these beautiful things that she does. I know that definitely a few of you are familiar with her work, and I hope that if you're not, through this, that you get to be familiar with her as a person, because she's magnificent, and of course, yes, her work. I got connected to Sarah just basically through Instagram, I would say, and then having some mutual connections and people that either kind of worked with her or had their photo taken by her that I know. And then you know how that is, little by little you're led to the page of the photographer, and I remember feeling very impressed with her work, and they had their own unique style, and I really appreciated how much floral elements she uses and works with. It's so nice to see. I love flowers so much, and she was just using them in this very different way than I had ever seen. And yeah, the vibrance, which I talked about in this episode, but just the vibrance of the photos themselves, they're beautiful. And she does these sessions called narrative sessions, and those you need to go check out for sure. Those have always felt extremely special to me as well. I'll take this time to share a little bit about Sarah here. Sarah Sovereign is a narrative photographer who explores the intersection between grief and joy, memory and objects. Her work often employs florals and water to visually demonstrate pain, trauma, grief, flow, and resistance. As a photographer, she works alongside people as they explore their own stories and experiences with visual medium. Based in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Sarah is also a registered clinical counselor who focuses on ADHD, especially in women and late diagnosis, creativity and burnout, and grief. I will link her information here in the bio for you, of course. You can find her website and her counseling practice website, and then her Instagram if you want to get connected with her. Would recommend you take a gander on her work, or just work with her in general. She's genuinely lovely just as a person as well. And I'll take this time to share about our latest partner. Some of you have maybe heard of them before, for sure, and it's a company based out of Squamish, British Columbia, called Squalwyn Botanicals. I'll share here a little bit about them. Squalwyn Botanicals is an Indigenous skincare brand that honors cultural knowledge, Indigenous plant science, and self-care. Founded by ethnobotanist Lee Joseph of Squamish First Nation, Squalwyn provides gentle and effective skincare and wellness products that draw from the ceremonial aspects of plants. Incorporating sustainably harvested and sourced botanicals, Squalwyn unites ancestral traditions with modern beauty rituals, empowering people to connect to themselves and the natural world. So what I have here for you is a one-time use code for 20% off of your purchase with Squalwyn. And the code is Tulā20, so Tula 20. And I'll link that all below, and there'll be that in the bio for you as well. Okay, I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you. I hope that you love it. I hope that you enjoy it. I feel that the shares themselves were quite beautiful, and I loved my conversation that I had with Sarah just throughout that whole entire day that we spent together. So thank you so much. Okay, hello everybody. I'm here with my guest Sarah, and I'm really looking forward to sitting with you in this time and to share this time with you. And whenever you feel ready, if you'd like to introduce yourself, pronouns, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Sarah Sovereign. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a photographer in Chilliwack, and I'm also a registered clinical counselor. My photography, I do a lot of like narrative sessions, creative sessions, a lot of stuff about grief and loss and memory. And then with my counseling practice, I focus a lot on neurodivergence, ADHD, especially ADHD in women, and late diagnosis.
Really nice. Thank you, Sarah. The photography work that you do, that's where I first discovered you, if you will, because I had known some mutual maybe friends and like clients of yours, and then they had shared your photos, and I was like, oh, these are so beautiful. And one of the first things that really like I noticed was that they were different from anything I'd ever seen before. They have their own very special, unique style, and your use of color and how vibrant they are one of the things that caught my eye the most and that I saw the most. And there's so much use of like florals and this vibrancy or whatever. So when did you start taking the photos, and what was the thing that made you want to, I don't know, how long have you been taking photos for? Is this like a long-term life thing that you started when you were like a kid or teenager?
I was pretty young, and I think like, so I'm gonna kind of go off into a tangent. Please do. But like my father passed away like a few years ago, and especially recently I've been going through his collection of photos, and he was taking photos all the time. And now when I look back and I'm going through all of these pictures that he took, I realized that my dad documented a huge chunk of my life. And so growing up, there was always some kind of documentation happening, whether it was photos or he also made tapes for us. And there's like all of these taped radio shows that I used to make with my brother and my best friend when we were kids. And so like growing up, it was very, very natural to want to document and photograph and sort of like create a record of like what we were experiencing and what we were doing. And so I would have been, I think the one that I really remember is like I got a disposable camera when I was 11. And I was like, I'm going to take like
so much fun.
Most amazing photos. Nobody is ready for these. And it was like really like a collection.
Shit's going to drop.
I know. It's like a collection of me. Like just like with my like chin resting on my like half closed fist, like in a yard. Like it was just, there's all this like series of like, you know, self-portraits and like a picture of like my collection of dolls that I can't believe I ever had, right? You know, as I slept at night, just kind of watching over me, and like, so I have all of these like photos out of focus and like blurry and like art, right?
Young Sarah art.
Here it is. Here's everything, right. And it's like it's like a documentation of my awkwardness and my like, you know, who am I, and like figuring out who I am through like taking all of these photos. And so, I mean, I've been doing it for a very, very long time. And then I just started really being drawn to like, especially seeing like photo essays and seeing what people were creating. And like, I just felt this like intrinsic kind of like, ooh, like I want to do this too. I want to document like these things that I'm seeing, these experiences that I'm having, and especially the people in my life. I really wanted to take portraits of them and really like show a little bit about who they are or how I saw them in images. So.
And do you feel that something like the word like storytelling would come into like kind of play for you a little bit there?
I think so, yeah. And I mean, I think too, like, I grew up experiencing a lot of grief and a lot of loss. So there's like that extra kind of thing of you know, holding on to these sort of memory objects that we create. That's what photography is. These are memory objects. And so it's like this idea of like, capturing or documenting these moments that I've had with these people and remembering them through that. And I think that was definitely like a big thing, like for me, because you see them, like when I look back at those photos, I see like, okay, this was my grandmother's funeral, and I documented it when I was 12. I was taking photos of like the things that she had left behind. I was taking photos of the flowers and all of these things, just trying to remember her.
Yeah, and I find that in that there's like so much emotional value to the photos themselves. They're very like complex and layered when it's like that. When there's like intention and looking back and you're like, yes, this was at something that is like something I want to remember, and like, yeah, documenting every kind of part of life, you know, and there adds that like extra element of, yes, emotion, and they become a lot, they become very moving to me when there's that involved, you know. When you had this stuff from your dad, all of these things that he documented, is this something that you knew that always existed, or did you really only find all of that stuff, or like a majority of it, after he had passed?
I knew that it existed on one hand, but when I really started looking at it, I was like, oh, like, and I mean, so my dad, he loved singing, he loved talking, he was such a big talker. He was like a connector. He connected with people. But when he was young, and when me and my brother were young, he was told by a doctor that he was going to lose his voice. He damaged his voice when he was much younger. And so they said to him, like, eventually you will not be able to talk. You definitely won't be able to sing. And he wasn't able to sing at that time. His voice was cracking. I remember it being like very high pitched. So part of why we have these tapes is because my dad was like, I want my kids to know what it sounds like when I read them stories. So they're all stories of him reading us books. And so when we moved, like, I just found so many of those tapes still. And so I was able to like play them back and hear like me as a baby, just like, you know, chattering away, and then my brother asking questions and my dad answering him. And it's just like these voices. And so, I mean, like, I knew that they were there, but at the same time, it's like, oh, like these are treasures. These are like, it's just amazing to have these, like, you know, to sort of like greet your childhood self in that way. And like, you know, to think about my dad when he was younger than I am now, and like
thinking that way.
It's
quite wise, actually,
right?
To have that thought, for sure, you know. And to me, I feel like there's never too much of any of that documentation for your children when they get older. Like, I was thinking about the other day, and I was like, there's never going to be any video of me running around as like a 3-year-old. That just doesn't exist. It might, but I don't know anything about it, and it's not something that my family has. Maybe like a family friend. Right. And I thought, man, I would love to see the way that I like walked, and the way that I did this, and like even like laughing or crying, whatever, you know, anything. And it's something that I think, of course, like anybody who's young right now is not going to have any like shortage of, for sure. You know, when they get older, there's going to be so much documentation of them just being beings, and that's a beautiful thing, for sure. You know, it's interesting because I didn't know any of this, right? So it's interesting as you share this about your dad, and like how, for me, as you share him wanting to like, yes, take photos and like doing all this wonderful like documentation and like loving and caring about you know, his children at that time, how that comes through from my perspective in you, and like how I see, like, of course, you documenting people's journeys and what you've like done with people and in your sessions, that I believe you call them narrative sessions, is like what, because I had asked you one time, I was like, I want to do one. I was like, I want to go on a little narrative session with you, and there's a few that always stuck with me of your photos, and ones that you've gone and done. And there was one, and I don't know the lady's name, but there was one where she was wearing a garbage bag, and she was in the water, and then I think she had like a floral thing that was like representative of her spine. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes. Yeah. You know, and I was never like that one never was lost on me. Like, always kind of stuck with me because it was, of course, very powerful and something a little bit different. Yeah. And so when you do these types of sessions with people and in their like healing and processing journeys and what have you, is this something that turns out to kind of be, of course, like a collaboration between you and your like subject and client, or is it like they come typically with like an idea and now you just have to capture it?
It's kind of, it really depends on the client and sort of what they want, because sometimes people come and they just have like a story, and they're like, you know, this is a story, I want to tell it, I want to explore it visually, but I don't really know what that's going to look like. And so sometimes we'll kind of like, we will talk about it and we'll sort of unpack it a little bit, and like, just as they're talking, there'll be things like symbolism that start coming out, and then I'll say like, well, you know, I think with that one, it was like, we were talking about it, we were talking about her spine, and I was like, well, what about like a floral spine? and I get to work with like just like incredible people that are able to put those kinds of things together. And and then what always happens is like I always think of the word unfold, because these sessions really do unfold in their own way. I think sometimes when we come to it and we have a very, very, very specific narrative that we want to tell, it's really hard to get that, because once you're in it and you're making it and you're experiencing it and you're expressing it, things just kind of move or flow into like a different area. You start to really see or learn more things and really get like it's almost like a different perspective or a different layer to the story that you're wanting to tell. And sometimes people will come to me and they'll be like, this is the story, and then when we finish everything, they look at it again and they're like, oh, this is what I see from this now.
Yes. Yeah, you know, and that comes up for me a lot in the sessions that I do as well. They're not the same, but just, you know, similar, just taking people's pictures in general is it's nice that you say unfolding and leaving room for that like openness and flexibility and like letting it be what it needs to be, because especially I find in a healing session, people already know where and what they kind of want to heal. They have like an understanding a little bit to be like, here, I'm coming to you with this thing, and this is what I'm facing, and this is my trauma that I'm working on, or you know, whatever. And then having that safety between the two of you to like work together and like allow it to kind of be what it needs to be. And typically I would say when it has that permission to be flexible, it really does represent basically exactly what it needed to represent. And it's not too like structured, it's not too stiff. People don't come with like, I need to have this. You know, I find that it's nice to have that space to be for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like and that's why I try and really tell people too, is that like it is a process. Like this is process-based photography, so like you're gonna get into it and things are gonna shift and flow, and you know, it's like you're in there's something. So like a while back I had a friend who asked me to take pictures of water for her art show. And I'm taking these photos, and I'm like, I hate all of these photos. Like, this is not
your thing, mate.
I'm just like, these don't look right. Like this, like I love water, but I'm like, this doesn't look like what I want to impart. Yeah. And I realized, you know what? I'm taking all of these pictures from the shore, and I'm looking down at the water, or I'm looking out at the water. Okay. And I was like, what would it look like if I was in the water? So then I started going into the water and taking photos, and you're just like surrounded by water, and it's like every little wave and every little ripple, and the sun coming and reflecting off the water. And I love those photos. Like those are some of my favorite images. And I realized, like, you know, before I was like looking out at the water and sort of telling what it is. Like, here it is. Yes. Here's the water. Here's the lake. Yeah. And then as it is. Right? And then you get into it though, and you let the water tell you what it is.
100%.
And it's like, and that's, I think, what the sessions are like, is that, like, you know, you can see it, you can be like, here, I got this lake I want to, you know, talk about. But then you get into it and you're like, oh, it's like, it is deeper. It is a deeper lake than I thought it would be. It is like more, sure. There Colder, are more things.
Like everything.
There are more things happening here.
Yeah, absolutely, you know. And it's nice even in that, when you went on your own, to just listen to that message coming through, to be like, what if I do this instead? What if I try this instead? Because sometimes that happens, of course, I think for a lot of us as creatives, you know, there's like a little voice, and you might not always like follow through with it or listen to it. But then when you like tune into that really strong, very powerful, typically accurate inner knowing, then you get like some of the best photos you've ever or like some of like your most favorite photos or something like that. Just understanding and listening to like that knowing in and of itself, you know. And I find too, in your photos as well, and in your work, there is a lot of water, like a lot of people getting into water. And is that something that people say that they want as well? Like, I want to have water, I want to be in the water.
Right. It happens a lot. And I think I really I love those sessions because like I usually go into the water as well, and I'm usually like fully clothed, just walking right
let's
on
go.
in.
Yeah,
right? Let's just
take
it. And sometimes you like I get in there and I'm like, oh, I've been in the water for like 3 hours, and like now I need to like get out and like warm up and stuff.
Right.
Not that I make everybody stay in the water for 3 hours, but like when you're in it and you're creating, sometimes I'm not like I'm just in a different place, but like I do think there's something like transformational about water and something like really soothing and nurturing about water. So like when you go into the lake, or it's just like it you find that people sort of like uncover more things sometimes with that process. Yeah. And there's been a couple, like I did one, I guess it was last year, and it was January, and what she really wanted to do was like she really wanted to like jump into the water. And this had been like, we had a completely different plan, and she had like all of these things that she brought with her that she wanted to set up in a certain way and do a certain thing. And we kind of started a little bit in that direction. And then I said like, you know what, I think we need to like let these things go for a little bit and just let's go to the water. Let's like go to the water and kind of see what happens. And it turned into a completely different shoot where like at the end she like dove in, went under, and it was just like and the images I think were not what she had envisioned them being, but they were what she wanted them to be at the end. Like they were like, this was what she wanted to say, and these are the ones that she really felt the connection to.
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting too, because it's good that you are able to identify that like she's trying to do this one thing and setting these things up, but it's becoming maybe even again like too structured, too forced. And the photo itself doesn't always come through when it's like too planned, too forced, too whatever, and too like fixed. Someone's idea is too fixed on what they want. The photo doesn't really, I find at least when I take those types of pictures, I don't even like those pictures. I'm like, this is just not, it's not working. It's not doing what I'm hoping and what I think that they're hoping it'll do. Like even for myself, I always have like intentions of something I want someone to take a picture of me with, and I set it up and I'm like, this is like, I gotta let it be a little bit more free, and
you gotta kind of like, I mean it is very protective, right? It's so protective to be like, ooh, this is what I want it to be, this is what it's gonna look like, and this is how we're gonna do it. And it's so I mean it makes absolute sense, and at the same time like part of the narrative and like really figuring out what you're gonna say in the story is being able to get into the process. And I don't think you can get into the process if you're so focused on it'll look like this, right? Or if you have a lot of props. I think props can sometimes be, we can carry a lot of them, and again that's like very protective. That's like a very protective thing.
I find too with like the water element in and of itself, it's of course it's very healing, it's very nurturing. I feel like we all have that like great feeling of like emotion and power, and the healing properties of water. And I think too, it like you said, it like kind of it unfolds into what it has to kind of be with people and the subject. And water itself is very vulnerable, just in general, to go in there. Just to go in there is a very vulnerable thing in and of itself. And I think that helps the photo to even have that other little aspect of vulnerability. And even, telling someone's story and like saying what it needs to say is by people getting into the water. And those are some of my favorite photos of all time too. Just people in water.
Yeah, I love it.
It's so beautiful.
I love them.
Yeah.
And it's like so nice for me because like I go in and I'm leaving it too, and I'm like freezing cold, but I get to like warm up and like, because there's so much like when you get cold like that, you have to like, you get to engage with like these self-care practices too, where you're like, you know, taking care of yourself after, and you're warming up, and you're, you know, it's just, I love it. Like I love that like post-shoot kind of like recovery. It's just, it's nice.
Yeah, 100%. I really like that time too, driving home. Like sometimes at a red light, I'll like turn my camera on and like look at a photo.
Yeah,
like,
right?
Oh, I love this
like,
one.
Oh, this one turned out so good.
I can't wait to edit these. I can't wait to like upload them.
The best feeling.
For sure, you know. And so, do you find like do you have also, because you are hoping that people get into the process, and so, and then people are like willing to be open and just let the moment be what it needs to be. And that's what a lot of what I will do with people in sessions. I'll just say to them like,
just be as, you know, I do some stuff with them, of course, but like just be as present as you can be and really allow the moment to be what it's going to be. Because if you just go for an hour with someone, that time is over so quickly. And then they might get home and be like, shit, I should have done this, and I wish that I was more free, or I, you know, or I didn't get something I kind of was hoping for, or whatever, you know. So I'm like, just embrace the time, because it'll be over, and then you don't want to be kicking yourself later and be like, shit, you know, she asked me to jump up on that log and I was too scared, and I, you know what, like whatever it is, right? And so do you find, like, do you have like something you do at the beginning of the sessions that help people to arrive into this space?
I think, like, well, just kind of in my experience, when people show up to the session, they are there. Like, I think it's like coming to it with like everything they've been thinking about it, it's been leading up to it. It's different than when it's a very different thing, like, than when I do a portrait session with someone. It's like, if it's a portrait session, it's the same thing, like that's a really good way to put it, like, be present to like the moment. And then sometimes it's even like deep breathing, or like, let's just take a minute and like close our eyes. But when it comes to the narrative sessions, people really arrive like electric. Like, they are, like, we're here and we're ready, and like we're ready to kind of do this stuff. And sometimes still there's all this stuff, like, you can tell that there's all this stuff kind of like running through their head, and there's nerves and there's all this other stuff. Lots of stuff going on, but they're always there, right? Like,
and you know, they're seeking the like the healing, of course. Like, they were willing to message you, to set it up, to know that they want this, or that the body needs this, the mind needs this, the soul. And so I could see how they would arrive a little bit differently than just someone who needs like a photo for LinkedIn, you know. You know, they might come in and like they're like, I want this. And I find too, like, in a lot of work that revolves around like healing and like self-understanding or whatever, you know, people are like hoping to, or like seeking to be like taken care of for that amount of time, and like to be seen, to be like nurtured, to have their whatever they're facing validated. I think that the sessions are a great source of validation for people in their journeys and their healing journeys, or even just their own like storytelling of their lives and their situations and what they've been through.
I think it's like, it's so interesting because like you go into it and you're like, you're going through this process and you're doing this stuff, but then there's like another stage, because then you see the images from it after. And I often tell people too, like, you know, like, you'll see the images and it's not about the images being perfect. Like, it's not about them being like, here's a perfect image, everything was great, the lighting was fantastic, everything was like together. Like, they're often not polished images. They're like a little bit messy and a little bit chaotic sometimes, and a little bit like
a little blurry, or something like that.
A little blurry, right? Sure. And it's like, but it's like, this is creation, this is like artistic expression, this is like, you know, this is the process, like, made into an art object. So it's like, I don't know where I was going with that, but
it's okay. I mean, we get lost on our tangents because we get excited about our work, you know? You know, and that, I think, again, that is allowing the room to just let it be what it's gonna be in the process, you know. And I really like that you call it a process, and I like that it's not just taking pictures for the sake of taking pictures or anything like that. There is purpose, there's intention, there's something good that comes out of it for everyone involved, and even the people that you work with. Because I see in the pictures themselves, there's a lot of people wearing like floral crowns, I would call them, probably. I don't know if there's like a legitimate term for that. And then and people like working with florals. So I'm assuming you work with like a lot of the same person who puts these together as well.
There's so like Siobhan from Shivers Designs, she puts together a lot of them.
She does a beautiful job.
Oh, she's so good. And she's one of those people, like, it's just, and I don't know if she knows like how much of a skill it is, because she'll look at something and she'll be like, and I'll just do this and this and this, and I'll do whatever, and then she puts it together, and she just does it. She just sees it, and it's like, it's amazing every time she does it. So I work with Siobhan, and I also work with Lisa Glover. So she's a florist, and she's done, like, she made a beautiful floral chair for me once for someone, and like, just lovely. And we did a shoot too about menstruation, and she made like these like beautiful like floral pieces, and just beautiful. beautiful. And then I also work with Britt from Blossom Floral Design.
Okay.
So she also, like, these people, like, I come to them and I'm like, this is kind of what we're thinking of, like, doing. And it's just, you know, whatever. And then they just kind of interpret it and make something. And each of them makes things differently than the other. So it's, like, so cool to see
their process.
Their process.
Yeah, their process, for sure. And I think that they probably get very happy and excited to work with you, or when you're coming with something, because this is not just saying, like, please make me a bouquet, make me a vase, whatever. You're coming with something, like,
something weird. Let's get weird.
That's exactly it. Yeah, let's get spunky, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I find you're coming with something that is not, I don't think that anybody else is coming to them with that stuff. Not very frequently, at least. You know, it's like, here, I want you to take this, and it tests their creativity as well. It tests their knowledge, it tests their skill, and it's good for growth for everyone.
Oh, it's like that collaborative piece of, like, getting together and just kind of, like, seeing what happens is, like, I think that's my favorite thing. That's one of my favorite things about just creating in general. When you have, like, a group of people and you all like each other and, like, you're all just, like, bringing something to it and you're making, it's just magic.
It is magic. It is magic, and it's, like, priceless, of course. You know, there's nothing that could, like, put any sort of, like, price on that. You're just like, oh, this is, like, just the most incredible thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's
awesome.
Yeah, you made some really beautiful connections here, for sure. You know, and then I think you work with, like, people that do things. I think there's people that, I don't know, I saw something about people who work with, like, different clothing. And I seem to be, like, a makeup artist that there's, like, involved as well with your work too.
There's a few different makeup artists that I've worked with too, like, so HKF Studio, Harp, like, lovely, Kayla Simpson.
Are a lot of them based, like, here as well, so you're able to connect, like, with them, or
through the through the valley. So there's, like, there might be a doorbell in a second.
Oh.
No, I think it's just
okay. A little package moment.
That's the nice thing, is I can just see when people come up.
Oh,
yeah, there it is.
All right, everybody, knock knock. I'm sure he'll just leave it. Anyways, so the makeup artist through the valley. Through the valley,
yeah, like, they're all kind of, like, through the valley. There's also Vancouver Makeup was another one that I like. So, like, they kind of, like, it kind of
wherever you need to be.
Yeah, and, like, I find that it's really helpful to work with, especially makeup artists who have kind of who are very flexible, because, like, sometimes we don't always know, like, what's gonna be happening.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Or it might change.
It might change. It might be, like, a little different.
Yeah. Leading up to it, because I find, like, for the most part, not, you know, I would say maybe the average person that doesn't do too much, like, photography work or experience or anything like that, they don't really know fully what to expect or what is going to happen, and so they have an initial plan, and then sometimes they kind of change that, of course, or they psych themselves out of what they thought they wanted to do, or whatever. There's a lot of room. I think your patience would come in very well for this, because you're very patient. You know, there was never a time where I was, like, worried to be like, Sarah, we can't do this today. You know, you were like, oh no, it's no problem. Like, wow, what a nice person. You know, like, it's very sweet.
I find that there's, like, some things it's just, like, don't, like,
let it go.
Know, like, it's just, you know, things will happen when they need to happen. It's,
right.
It's like an unfold process again,
there
right?
You go.
Like, we were going to get together. It was going to unfold into something at some point. The intention was there.
Yeah.
It's just making things happen.
Yeah, for sure. You know, that room for allowing. Just allowing what will be to be. And it's nice that you say that, because, you don't want to get too hung up on, like, expectations or what anything, and that probably actually comes a lot for you, maybe just in who you are and what you've experienced in your life, but as someone who works with, like, the public as a photographer, and then someone who works now in, like, counseling and, like, working with people when they're, like, not maybe even being or feeling their greatest, and, like, having that patience for them, and then to just allow and have that safety in both of the work that you do. Like, both, there has to be this element of, like, understanding, a calmness, and a patience to just, it'll be what it'll be, for sure.
I hope that comes across. I do.
It definitely comes across.
Okay.
Definitely comes across, you know, because I you know, we had to navigate a few things, you and I, definitely. Like, it's been a little bit of a journey for both of us to get here, you know, and so I don't even know when I first messaged you, but months ago
feel
now.
like-
months ago.
I feel
Like
like
October.
it was the fall. Yeah, it was the fall
Yeah,
sometime.
like we're in, where are we? Spring. Like just.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost April, and it's like, whew.
Yeah. And you're
Yeah.
very sweet. You're very kind about it all. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you too, because like we moved and I got sick at one point too. So
Yes,
like
you
it's
were.
like
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be really nice for us to get into now your work in counseling and how that came to be, and also even the specifics of why you work with who you want to work with, or what your what do we call them? What would you like to call them? Not patient. I don't know if you want to call them patient. What would you like to call them?
Like clients.
Clients. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the clients that you work with in your counseling practice, why you feel like is it ADHD and neurodivergent primarily that you work with or focus on? Are you open to anything, or is that kind of your area of
It's I would say it's kind of my area, but it's also it does go beyond that too. So I do a lot of work too with grief, people who are dealing with grief, and I have sort of a narrative and a collaborative approach to it. So it's what people bring to the session, what they want to talk about, and but I think with my own self, I have a late diagnosis of ADHD, and so it was kind of one of those things that I just really got into. I started really learning a lot about it, and it was when I was going to school and I was reading a textbook, and it was talking about women with ADHD looking so differently, because my brother has ADHD, so I was I'm
put two and two together here.
It's right, I mean, ADHD runs very heavily in my family,
yes.
And I'm I'm looking at it, but it was looking different than what I understood it to be when I saw it, especially in men, which is everyone I knew at that time that had ADHD was male.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw myself in this textbook, and I'm reading about it, and I'm like, could I have ADHD? Is this me? Do I have ADHD? And I just kind of and it totally reframes the entirety of your life. I think when you when you recognize that you have it, and then you can look back and you can suddenly look at these situations and have so much compassion for the self that you were, especially being a child who doesn't realize that there were so many times when I was growing up where I'd be I feel there's why am I like this, why am I doing things this way, why why do you think it would be so much easier if I could just be this way, I should be doing this a different way. And that was sort of an opening up for me of ooh, there's so much more compassion that I could be giving myself, so much more understanding.
Yeah.
Even moving forward into this. And I saw it too with I went to school for so long that when we looked at all the classes I taken and all the things that I had done, they were you almost have 2 degrees, and I didn't even mean to that one whole I think I'm 2 classes away from having my English degree as well, and I was just taking stuff that I liked. I was I'll
that is very ADHD coded,
and I had no idea. I had no idea. Right. And we'd have we'd have these papers due, and I always remember the instructors would be really, you should be working on it now. You should be don't let it
prioritizing or something.
Prioritizing,
okay,
this is a 15,000 word, I don't know, whatever paper, and you really should be working on it now. And I remember seeing the deadline, watching it come up, hearing my instructor even feeling that anxiety of well, I should probably be working on it. And I always thought about it, right? It was circling a drain, and I couldn't, so through the entirety of that time, I was writing my papers the night before they were due or the day that they were due. Right. And I did fine. I did great on the papers. It was and that's not a brag. I was up for I was just drinking Americanos and just, I was focusing at my computer for 8 hours straight.
Right.
And I was exhausted the next day, but that was my process. And I was so... I felt so guilty about that. I was the work that I'm doing is not as valid because I'm doing it in this condensed way and this this deadline way. But it's that is what I needed to do
to survive,
to survive,
get through it,
to get through school. Mm-hmm. So this was the process that I had worked out for myself.
Yep.
And once I realized that I had ADHD, I was oh, okay.
Yes,
I get that.
Yeah.
So this perspective for me is something that really made sense when I started opening up my own practice, I was like, you know, I really do have this understanding of neurodivergence. You know, like, so I have ADHD, I also have epilepsy, and so it's like this sort of this way that I can kind of understand, like, our brains are all going to be working in different ways, 100%. And sometimes we just need to have space for people to be able to show up how they are instead of how, you know, sometimes we think they should be. Yeah, there's a lot of shoulds that come into, especially growing up with like a late diagnosis. Yeah, you just get surrounded by shoulds of like all the things that you should be doing differently.
Yeah, a lot of shoulds, always shoulds. You know, even my own counselor said to me, she's like, you don't, no more shoulds. Don't say I should have done that. I should do this. She's like, you got to find another. You know, she told, I forget what it is now, but a different word, you know, for that instead of kind of, because in your mind, it should come with like shame sometimes, I guess?
Absolutely. Like when I look at should, like when we use the word should, where does that come from? I think it often comes from like an expectation outside of ourselves. We are not connecting with like our own self where we're like, I want. I need.
Right.
We're looking at like, you know, it's something else. Something external is telling us that we should be doing something, and that pressure and that shame and all of that stuff, I think, is not, it's not coming from us. Yeah. But we're still carrying it.
It's like different kind of voices or what you were conditioned to know growing up or societal whatever. So
like I should be working on my paper 3 months in advance.
Right.
But that wouldn't have worked for me.
There's no way that would have worked for you. That I didn't operate this. I can't do that. Can't do. I know that there's time. I'm not going to use it.
I.
You know, I'd rather live this way. On the edge.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and so is it ADHD that has like masking involved, or is that more of an autism? I don't know which, or is it in both? Like, is it something that you're?
There's definitely some conversation around like masking and ADHD that's kind of coming. Like, there's a lot of exploration now of autism and ADHD and having both at the same time as well, because up until I think it was like 2013, you could either have ADHD or you could have autism.
There was not the understanding that it could be
exactly
both.
Yeah, like, so you were either you either had ADHD or you were autistic, and like that was it. So now they're understanding that like there is a comorbidity with that, and you can have both at the same time. And so what does that look like? And so then what we're seeing people on social media sharing what their experience is of being autistic, sharing what their experience is of having ADHD and all that kind of stuff, or having both. You definitely do see people talking about masking. And I do think that like when you are going through life and you're having to, there's like so much I guess like shame that you can have when you're growing up with ADHD and you're having to do things and you're maybe not doing them the way that other people think you should be doing them, or you're doing them like in quotations like the wrong way, etc. There can be a lot of like, there's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria that they don't entirely understand yet, but people who have ADHD can have RSD, and it means that whenever there's like criticism or even perceived criticism, you're gonna feel that like feel it to a point of feeling pain around it.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know where I was going with this.
No, I was asking you about the masking and if that's something that comes in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, it's like, so when you look at it through that lens where you're kind of in a place where you have to perform to a certain degree in order to get things done, or in order
to get through something.
Yeah. It makes sense that you might have all of these different coping
things that you've developed and whatever. And do you find that that's something that you do or have done, and now even looking back at your childhood self, did you mask or anything? Have you observed that in yourself?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think there's lots of, I mean, I think growing up to like and moving around as much as we did and that kind of thing, like there's definitely things, I think there's kind of like an intersection too with all of that and burnout as well. So like you kind of like you put yourself in these positions, or you kind of like show yourself as being a certain way, and like, you know, I have this, I've got it handled, blah blah blah, but you don't have all the other supports underneath it, like you deserve. You know, we don't always talk about that. It's like, if you're gonna hold this position, you're gonna do this stuff, like what are your supports, how are you filling your cup, how are you making sure that, like, you know, that the things that you need are there, and that you don't have to feel shame or guilt for needing those things as well. And so there's that intersection of like, you know, you don't set yourself up, and then you know, perform at this like level that's not sustainable, and you burn out. And, you know, if you want to call it masking, or if you want to call it like whatever it is, anything, it's just not sustainable, and it slips. And you know, what do you do when that happens?
Yeah, and the why I ask you is because I think that it's great that, not great that you deal with this. I don't have like a diagnosis, but I for sure have some sort of ADHD. You know, like, I was on like Ritalin as a kid, you know, so I was like a little bit fussy, you know, and so I ask you that because, you know, with your clients coming in, because even when if I seek support in counseling or anything like that, I feel like am I ever able to just like, does anybody really know me? Like, who am I presenting myself as to some new person all the time? Different people probably know a different version of you, of me, of anybody, right? And so I'm wondering, like, your clients coming into session with you and maybe having, of course, yes, there are different ways of coping or even masking. If, like, how... I think that would be so beneficial for them to be able to come in and maybe just actually be themselves. Yeah. And not have to change or hide or mask, cope, suppress, anything. And they're just like, here, I'm coming into session and I'm looking to like mend these things or work on these things with myself and for myself. And feeling maybe an extra level of understanding and safety with you, knowing that that's present for you as well.
Right. I do hope that kind of like, you know, like I come from a space of understanding, because I also know what it's like for me, I know what it's like to have ADHD for me, and I understand and have empathy for how it might be for other people. Yeah. And I do think that it's a process too, to get to the point where you really do feel safe enough to settle in, to like, you know, like to really like relax into a couch and to like really be in that space. And I think it kind of flows, like I think it can come and go, and I think like the more sessions you have, the easier it can become. But I know that when people, especially when you first show up, like, it's like going to a doctor's appointment too, like you go to a doctor's appointment,
a little nervous maybe,
and I think expectations,
yeah.
And like you can go into a doctor's appointment and you can look like to totally fine. Like, who knows why you're going to, like, maybe you're going to the doctor's appointment because you're experiencing some kind of like pain. It's very easy to go into that doctor's appointment and be like, I'm fine, everything is great. It happens. Yeah. Like it's very protective. It's a very protective thing to do. It's because it's very vulnerable, but you're also kind of like figuring out, like, you know, how do I show this vulnerability with this person in this space. And so I think it takes time, and it's a process
to build that relationship. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times we're taught to not have anything be wrong with us, you know, or like don't be like, I feel like I see so much in, especially my friends, that our parents' generation was very like, just be happy. And if you're upset, it's no good. And having any sort of emotional response or reaction is not great. And you need to just, I like when you're happy, you know? And so even same thing, you go into the doctor's office, and they're like, I find myself doing it sometimes too. They're like, so how are you doing? I'm like, I'm great. You know, like,
it's like the automatic response. Everything is fine.
I'm good. How are you?
Yes. How are you? Yes. I do that too.
Caring about them. Yeah. You know, I do it with the therapist too. Like, here I am to be like, here's my stuff, and I'm ready, and I'm here in this session, and I'm looking to grow, and I'm looking to whatever. And she's like, I'm like, so how are you doing? Like, you know, like just checking in with them, making sure they're okay. Always putting your stuff to the side for some reason. Yeah. It's very, very interesting to observe this, like, you almost like you're scared to take up authentic space that isn't like happy, you know, and also just like taking up space, just being like, yes, this is for me now. Yeah. And I'm going to say to you that I feel terrible and I'm experiencing this, and this is very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can take time. Like, that's one thing that, like, I tell clients too sometimes is, like, you know, this is the first session, for instance, and it's like, let's just give it space.
Yes.
Let's give it space to even, like, get into the space, to know the space, to, like, feel safe enough. Like, you're the one that gets to decide when you're feeling ready to sort of, like, relax into that chair and, like, really, you know, explore things. And it's okay if you come in and you are masking, or if, like, masking is more comfortable, or, like, using your coping skills in that way is, like, more comfortable, like, that is totally fine too.
Yes.
You know, it's like, it's everything is a process, and I think it really makes a difference when you're across from somebody who's like, I have space for you to kind of, like, be who you need to be right now, like, here.
And I was going to ask you too, like, do you find that there's a certain amount of time that you work with someone that seems to be the average of when they're kind of able to start opening or whatever? And then I realized that there's no measurement of that, probably.
Yeah.
It's very personal.
Yeah.
On when they would allow that for anything to kind of come out that is, like, super vulnerable, I guess.
Yeah.
Or maybe even why they initially seek that out. Because I remember there's times where I've gone to seek support there, but it takes me like 8 months just to say what that actually was. You know? Yeah. And there's no measurement of that. I'm working with grief quite a bit right now. It's, like, definitely much more relevant for me than it's ever been before. I never really worked with grief in my life too much. At least I don't think so. And so I'm curious to know, when you work with people for like with their grief and on grief, that I'm thinking, and I feel like I've heard before, there's different types of grief. Is that correct to say, or like to?
Oh yeah, like, grief is very it's like it's very layered. It's very personal, and there's so many different types of grief that we can experience. Like, you know, there's, like, the loss of someone, or there's, like, you know, the grief that we can feel when we're dealing with our health. The grief we can feel even just, like, in moving to one space to, like, another space. The grief even in having, like, a late diagnosis of ADHD. The grief of, like, reframing your life and kind of seeing,
or like what it could have been when you were younger.
Yeah, like, you know, like the ways that you were maybe hard on yourself, or others were hard on you, and, like, you know, that grief of kind of, like, understanding, like, oh, like, I didn't deserve that, like. Yeah.
You know, and I'd only been really dealing with, like, the grief of loss lately. So then, for some reason, the Instagram Reels only show me what is relevant to me, even though I haven't searched for that at all. I don't know.
I don't know how they know.
How do they know? How do they know? I didn't look for it.
Yeah.
It's just all of a sudden, you know, he's like, you're going through a breakup. It's like, breakup. I'm like, how? Yeah. When did I? Whatever. Right? And it's like, you get in a new relationship. It's like, welcome in your new relationship. I'm like, how the hell does this happen?
It is unnerving.
It's very uncomfortable for sure. I'm just like, whoa, you know. But I got, like, things about where was I going with this? Something about, obviously, grief and, like, losing people. Oh, and it was saying that you know, grief in and of itself is everywhere, and it's in everybody, and everybody we know has experienced some form of grief, or definitely, like, a loss of someone. Because I feel like that's just obviously the cycle of life, and people have lost people, you know, and that it's everywhere, and we don't, like, talk about it, like. And it doesn't come up very much in conversation, and it's not highlighted or even has a light on it the way that maybe any other thing really has, or even the same way that, like, birth does. Like, birth is so amazing, wonderful, celebrated. It has this, like, positive attachment to it. It's wonderful. It's all these things. But, you know, losing or death or, like, whatever, all these things, they're just as much as part of the cycle.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's not talked about it at all, and it's one of those ones that, like, it causes extreme suffering in people to lose someone, or to lose any type of connection that they had. And it's just as much, it's, like, inevitable. We know that has to happen in the cycle. And I don't know why that is. Like, I know why, because it's painful, maybe it's more painful, you know, for people, and people have a hard time with like, loss and death. But I wish that it was, I don't know, more normalized, to just be like, this is a thing. Because even if you just mention, you'll say to someone like, oh, I lost so and so, oh, I'm so sorry, oh, that's terrible, whatever, blah, blah. I'm like, yes, it is, you know. but it doesn't have to always be so heavy, I suppose.
I think it's like it's like such an individual experience.
It is.
And every single loss that we have is different than the other.
Yes.
It's always different. And I think that sometimes we have these like rituals that we fall back on as sort of like a comfort. And I think that like I'm so sorry, I think that is kind of like a ritual that we have, like where we don't know, you know, or sending flowers or something like that. And I think when you're in the middle of that grief, I think some of those gestures can be a comfort for some people,
of course,
and then some of those gestures can be absolutely overwhelming and like, you know, and so I think that I think it's a beautiful thing when we can make space for people to express their grief in the ways that they need to, however that kind of, whatever that looks like for individuals. And I think we're still learning, you know, at least like in Canada, maybe, I don't know, like we're still kind of like learning how to do that with each other. And I do think that like when you're grieving and you meet someone or you find a space that's like, oh, this space can hold me, this space can hold that grief, I do think that there's just like so much healing that can happen there. Yeah.
And though it's a very personal and like individual experience and whatever, do you find that there's anything common or like an average hope that people have when they're like experiencing those things? They're like, I wish that they just did this instead, or I wish that somebody said this to me, or whatever. Is there any like common, like a little common denominator, like that people say often or that they want often?
I think that what people are really looking for when they're grieving is, I think people are really looking for connection. And I think that's why sometimes some of the things that we fall back on as automatic don't feel as healing as they might be intended, because I think it's that connection that people are really searching for, that like that space holding, that people and even the recognition or the validation that like this death was like, I think that a lot of the time it's like this death was too much, this death was life-changing, universe-changing, like it just is that sort of like validation and recognition that like this is too much, this is a lot, you know, this is a lot, and this space is here, and I'm and you're held here, you can express it here, you can connect here, I see you, I hear you, you know, that kind of stuff. I think that's sometimes missing from how we look at grief, and also the recognition that like grief is not a 3-month process. Like it's not like, hey, we had the funeral and now we're good.
Right. The funeral is actually, to me, especially when it comes, well, it's personal, I know, but when like it comes, I would say, let's say a month after the actual passing, looking back, the funeral is like irrelevant in any sort of like processing. Like it's okay, you know, whatever. But at least for me, when I think about it, I'm like, I was not even able to understand really at that point still what was going on. And it's really only in the last month, you know, and it's already been, let's say 8 months or something like that, that you're like still, working through that.
Absolutely.
And I think for a lot of people, it will never go away. It never stays with you till 90. You know, till you go to, you know, like it's with you no matter what. Yeah.
And I think it's like, there's like, I'm thinking of a metaphor, but I can't remember what it is. I don't know.
Right. It'll come.
But there's like this whole sense of like, you know, you can, like decades can pass since that loss, and you can still have that feeling of like, oh, you feel it. Like it's right there. And I think that with, you know, when a grief is immediate and it's just happened and you're going through that like first year without that person, it's there's all of these things that happen. You go through like a whole gamut of emotions, and it's like, I mean, I think back to like when my dad died, and there's like, you know, months that I barely remember because you're just surviving, like you're just existing without them and learning what that looks like. But you know, it's like that first year passes, and then that second year, it doesn't. How am I gonna put it? Like it's like sometimes it's not as intense, but it's still there, right? And it's like and it, year 3 comes and it's like maybe not as intense, but it's still there. And it's still, it stays with you, like you carry them with you.
100%. It does, it doesn't, and that's what I feel like when I saw that quote of like grief is everywhere, and everyone has experienced it, or everyone is experiencing it, and we don't really talk about it too much as a society, that it like touches exactly on what you're saying right now. Is like that it's it always stays with you. It's always there. It softens maybe a little, but sometimes not so much. Because
sometimes it's like
10
it's
years
right there.
It's right there. It's like it happened yesterday, whatever, it changes so much, and it's so true of like coming in waves. I see that for sure, because there's sometimes where I'm like, it's fine, and then the next day you're like, oh my god. Just this up down process, and like you think it's okay. And I remember I saw something about something where the person had lost someone, and it was like the 5-year anniversary of the loss. And that, like, just to really, for them to, like, clue into the fact, like, wow, it's been 5 years since this thing, and that's such a, like, I guess, like, almost kind of like a big measure of time, and to think, like, I've gone 5 years without even, like, talking to this person anymore. I haven't, like, it's such a, to measure the time, and, like, have these, like, almost milestones of just, like, and it becomes more real as time goes on, even though it's real 8 months in, even though it's real a year in. It changes in your understanding of the new reality, for sure.
I think it changes and it flows, and like some days you're like, okay, I'm doing pretty good today, and then the next day maybe not, and it's like, so that's when it's like, okay, well, when do your supports come in, and like the support is not there to make you forget. The support is to lift you up as you remember. Right. So it's like, just the other day, it was the 21-year anniversary of when my cousin died. Wow. And it's like, and I feel that, like, it's like, even though it's been 21 years, it's like when a certain time in March comes up, and I can smell, like the wind comes in, and you can kind of have that smell, and you're like, ooh, and I'm suddenly like, I'm right back there, like I'm right back to that moment, and to like, or to like even to the funeral or to whatever, and your body remembers.
Yes, it does.
So it's like when you've experienced the loss of somebody, we have a tendency to put a timeline on it, but the timeline doesn't exist. What really happens is that it's like, as you grow sort of distance from it, it may become less intense. It may become easier to manage, easier to pick stuff up, easier to just kind of like carry on in a new way. But it doesn't mean that you're still not having those like waves of grief and that experience and remembering them, and it's you carry them with you.
Right. Yeah. And when you talk about supports for people to seek, what would those be? Like, I would imagine it's obviously different, but what are the things that you suggest to people or what are even things that they come up with that they're like, this is the type of support that I feel I need? What would those be?
Well, I think it's different for everybody, but there's stuff like, like accessing therapy, looking at things that bring you joy and bring you comfort. So like if you, find comfort in creative expression, if you like, I make a lot of art around grief. Like one of the things that, so like, and I guess, I'm talking about it from more of like my own personal experiences with it, but, me and my husband both have experienced quite a bit of grief in like the last 3 years. His brother and his father died, and then my father died as well. So like we're dealing with those losses. And so one of the things that I started looking at was creating a project called Grief Houses. Okay. So, and that's this idea of like going into homes where someone has either recently died or, and just kind of documenting the items that were left behind, documenting the just what the house looks like the like where they put their toothbrush, or like the things that they put on their windowsill, and I mean there's so much that you go through, like when somebody dies, like the going through their things is its own type of it's a lot. So I mean that's one of the ways that I sort of like cope with it and express it and explore it is that like I'm looking at like, okay, like these are the things that are left behind. Even going through my dad's stuff and his photos and, you know, and going through the pictures and the tapes and all that kind of stuff.
So much crying.
So much crying.
So much crying. Yeah.
And that's
and then like laughing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's its own grief process. Like there's all these like different processes, and it's really like checking in with yourself with like not about how you should be grieving, but about how you need to grieve. Giving yourself that space, moving your body when you need to move your body. You know, like there's even talking with like I mean different kinds of counselors, and like there's just so much. Like one of the things that I took up too was like swimming. I find swimming is like really helpful for me. I love swimming.
The water. See, the water.
I can swim, but I'm not like a very like great
I'm not a
swimmer.
good swimmer. But I like it.
Right? And sometimes I'm in that pool and I'm
Yeah.
swimming and I make eye contact with the lifeguard and I can tell that he's like, is she okay? Like
I'm glad that there isn't lifeguards where I go, because it would be the same. I'd be so embarrassed. I'm like, look, I gotta plug my nose.
Right? I'm like, I am doing a doggy paddle, but I'm
my head's up here. I'm
breathing. I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like all these things that you kind of, you know, that you make space. I think that's like one of the biggest things for people is like, what are you making space for as you grieve?
Yes.
What are you, you know, sometimes you don't know what you need, but
that's
it's
right.
like, you know, maybe go to a support group or like, you know, reach out to a counselor or start something that brings, just start with like where you're finding comfort or where you're finding joy, if you can access joy at that time. Like, you know, just to give yourself space to grieve.
And in that, I find it's even though it's like always hard and challenging, it's still an opportunity to learn about yourself. There's a lot of learning that can go on, and it does give you an opportunity for like self knowledge, self understanding, stuff like even utilizing your intuition a little bit more. Like, what do I even need? Like, what would be helpful for me right now, or just what is my body even craving? It doesn't even have to be attached to that. Like sometimes it's like my body's really craving that I need to go to this like yoga class or something like that, and I might not even realize that it's like because my mind has been full of this upsetting thing. But now my body's really craving like to go to this thing or to go swimming or something like that.
Or to even be like, you know, I'm gonna go and like eat something. I'm gonna go have some. I'm gonna go get some water.
That's exactly
like
it. Yeah.
Giving yourself
little cues,
right? Giving yourself just something, even a very small thing, and just recognizing that like when we're in grief, like it's you know, we're not going to be operating at the same way that we were before grief.
It was very cloudy.
It's very cloudy. It's very cloudy, and it takes the time that it takes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that is one of the things that we have a tendency to do is we tend to put timelines on grief.
On anything.
Right? Where you're like, you know, it's like, oh, it's been a year. You should be.
Got the shoulds. Yeah.
You know, and it's like, that's not how it works. That's not, just from like lived experience, from people talking about it, from studies, from everything. Grief is long. Grief is long.
Yeah, well, it's lifelong. I feel like it's lifelong depending on the situation and the person themselves, right? And it's interesting because even in relationships, this comes up a lot for me where I speak to people, just friends and stuff like that they're in relationships that they don't want to be in, and that they feel a lot of pressure from their friends to like exit the relationship, and that, you know, they come to them and say, it's really hard, I don't like want to be doing this anymore, and whatever, and that their friends are like, just, you know, you deserve better, just call it quits, whatever. And I always say to people when I talk to them, I'm like, no one can tell you how or when to make that decision. No one can say to you, like, that's a huge emotional choice to make, you know, and it also comes with grieving when the time does come to do that, you know, or sometimes you're grieving already while you're in it. And so that like area of grief of like romantic or relationship grief too is, again, like it takes time, and it has to come at some time, and no one can tell you like, oh, it's been a year, or you should be over this, or you should just call it quits, or just break up with them, or whatever. That Absolutely. Is not a choice that anybody can make for you, or pressure you into, or make you feel shame about being in. It's like, oh, the person, you know, you stayed an extra year. That's just the way it is. That's what it needed to be.
Yeah.
And you have to allow that.
Yeah.
Right.
to allow yourself the space to kind like we're all figuring it out.
No one knows.
We go along.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be curious to what you think about like people saying to not intellectualize your processing of anything too much. I feel like I've seen quite a bit of that, and I'd be curious to know what you think of that, of just like when you're going through hard times and when life is challenging and when you're faced with all these things, and to basically, you know, feel the feels is what, you know, people are always saying, and to not intellectualize things too much, because sometimes that doesn't actually help you to process. And again, I would imagine that that's personal, like it's individual experience, but I feel like I've seen that so much, and I want to know what you think about people intellectualizing instead of maybe just like feeling or allowing the sensation of like the uncomfortability or something.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think that's like so individual too, because it's like, why are people intellectualizing? Like, is that something that's more accessible for them? Is that something that's safer for them right now? So, I mean, I think there's like all these layers into, when you get into it, is like, hey, well, why is this happening? And it's like, so we can, I think sometimes when we're like intellectualizing, or we're not doing, it's like doing therapy, right? It's like we're not doing therapy the right way, or we're like, you know, we're not getting an A in therapy.
Exactly.
And it's like, that's not really like, that's not really what it is. So it's kind of like looking at, like, you're going to show up to it, and there's going to be layers, and you're going to kind of unfold them as you go. And I think sometimes it can take time and, again, space to get to that place where you're kind of like able to feel, like, I think feeling things in your body is like not something that's really super accessible for a lot of people. And it comes with a lot of stuff. Like, as soon as we're like looking and listening to our body, it's like, whoa, like, and now all this other stuff is coming up, and it's like, so I think that's kind of one of the things about therapy, is that it's like, it's really easy to say like, oh, we're gonna do 3 sessions, and this session will be this, and this session will be this, and then at the end you'll get like a gold star, and then you can go. It's really like,
put it in a little sticker book.
It's like a process. And I say that the same thing too with, like, you know, when people come and do a narrative session, that is just one facet of your story or of your experience. And you might come back and do another narrative session, and it unfolds in a different way, and it's another facet of that same story. And it's like, it is layered, and it's kind of complex, and it's like really this idea of like, you know, checking in with, how am I feeling in terms of like, how is this working for me? How am I, you know, what does safety look like to me? Like, what is, you know, all this stuff, like what's accessible for me right now as I'm talking about this, and what might be accessible for me when I come back and look at it again. And
for sure. It's
like, I don't know, I just think it's like such an individual process, and it's just, I don't know, it's unfolding it and kind of seeing what it looks like as you go.
Yeah, and I hope and want everyone to feel liberated in their individual understanding and process as well. You know? Like, no shoulds.
No shoulds.
No
like,
shame.
Just to kind of give your, like, hey, I'm entering into this, and I don't know entirely what it's going to look like, but I'm going to give myself grace. I'm going to give myself grace and compassion and be gentle with myself as I unfold it. And do you find the narrative sessions have changed at all since you had you completed like even counseling? They're so, I mean, they're so different. And it's like, it's at one point I had planned to offer narrative sessions as a counselor, so like
I feel like I saw something like that or something.
Connected to counseling. And then I really kept thinking about it, and I was like, these are 2 different roles that I'm taking on. And there's a really good I guess like a book or like an essay, I don't know, it's like it's by Susan Sontag, and she has a book called like On Photography, which is really interesting. It's really, really interesting. And she talks a lot about the bias of the photographer. And so that's why I separate them. So like, you know, you can come to me for a counseling session, or you can come to me when I'm a photographer as a narrative photographer. Because I do think that there's like a bias that we carry as a photographer when you're interpreting someone's story. At the root of it, every single time that I sit with someone, I'm documenting what I see, what, you know, what's kind of resonating for me, that's coming up for them, that's like, you know, how I'm shooting it, how I'm choosing to shoot it, the light that I'm using, the way that I'm using. There's like so much bias in that, and I try to do it in a way that's like gentle and compassionate and as truthful as like I feel I can be to that person's experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think all work comes with a boundary as well. Like I find that I have a boundary in my work as a yoga teacher with the student, with the whatever, you know, and then there's a boundary with any person I take a photo with too, and there's definitely a boundary with any sort of person you see for counseling, right? Because that's like a huge thing, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that changes. Changes. You know, sometimes I don't want to always have I don't always want to bridge the gap between those two. I'm like, let's just keep these things like their own little thing, and especially because you're working with people on very vulnerable levels in a lot of your work too, and I think that changes things a lot. It's not just all like surface level stuff. It's like, you know, stuff that really matters to people. Yeah. And
I think that's why, so I've kind of like gradually started calling myself a healing informed narrative photographer. So I'm like, I'm not doing these sessions, I'm not photographing as a counselor, I'm photographing as a photographer. But I have that knowledge base of, you know, of safety and of, you know, making the space as supportive as I possibly can. But yeah, I mean, it shifts and it changes because like every session that I do like that is learning for me. It's all kind of like, ooh, like I really liked how this worked, and I think this was like really helpful, and I think like, you know, and so yeah, I mean, the more that you do it, it's like anything with art though too. It's like if you just give yourself permission to step into and like unfold something that you're interested in, like you'll find like there's just so much cool stuff.
It's amazing.
Like, it's amazing.
It's like one of the best things I've ever decided to do, for sure. I would have never assumed that I would have started to do that or like worked much in like any sort of photography stuff, and now I'm like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever done.
It's so cool.
Yes.
And like, I mean, for me, like there's so many things that like, and I think this does have, I think this is like an ADHD strength for me, which is like where I'll have an idea and I'll be like, I'm doing it immediately. Right? Okay, so like I did, what was it, like in 1 year I had this idea, and it was like right at the end of my semester, which was like bananas, and I was like, oh, I'm so stressed out, I would love to like start doing anything else other than this. And so I had this idea of like, how cool would it be to take a photo an hour for 24 hours. Very cool. It was so cool, and so like that's what we did. So it was like me and my friend Audra, who like Audra does a lot of photography.
I've seen her. Yeah, I've seen her for sure.
So
shout out to Audra.
Right? So we did this whole a portrait an hour for 24 hours. We chose to do it in March, which was
a little cold still.
It was a little cold,
and
it got dark really early.
Of course,
and I don't usually use like lighting. I use natural light a lot, so I'm like trying to figure out how to like light things with I don't know. It was just like there was a time. So I think it was like around midnight or 1 a.m. We're sitting in her truck underneath a street light. It's pitch black outside. We've already taken like however many portraits. We still have the rest of the night to go. And we both just kind of like looked at each other like, what have we done? Like, what have we done? This is like the worst
theory,
idea.
It sounds good. Yeah, right.
And then our 2 a.m. showed up, Amber. She showed up and she like stands underneath this street light, and it's like shining down on her, and it's like this beautiful creative moment that revitalized us and kept us going for the rest of the it was a rough night. But we did a portrait an hour. So then I took that project, and I was like, okay, so this worked, this didn't work, we have to switch it. So then we did it again. We did it in June.
A little bit better idea,
a little bit of a better idea, a little warmer.
So it's chilly.
But the way that we made up for how like all the slow time that we had in March, because we had a lot of slow sitting out on a street time.
Yeah, you're just waiting.
Waiting.
Yeah, because the photo takes some time, sure, but it doesn't take like the whole
And
hour.
when you're shooting like in pitch dark of night, we had like one poor girl, Kate. I told her, I was like, I just envisioned pancakes, like you holding a plate full of I don't know what I was thinking. But we had also envisioned that it would be like lit maybe like in a home or something like that. Yeah. But we took it outside.
I was gonna say, did she bring pancakes?
And it's
like
just
outside?
it's just her holding a stack of pancakes in the pitch dark. Like it's just like it's just.
And you like the photo?
No. It was so rough. It was so, but it was like the experimental, right?
Yeah.
So then we do
June.
Course. And in June, I'm like, let's put as
waffles.
much as we can. Let's do waffles. Fantastic.
Right.
But like, let's put as much as we can into like June. And that was like, we went completely into the opposite side where it was like, oh, this is maybe too much. So like, I got a tattoo So we did one portrait with a tattoo artist.
Okay.
And got tattoos. We got matching tattoos while we were there.
Yep.
What else did we do? We went dragon boating.
Okay.
And I was so in this space of like, I was just so jacked from like an entire day of portraits, getting my tattoo, doing all this stuff. I just remember having like this surreal moment at the front of the dragon boat as looking at all of them like paddling and just being like, I am the queen of the dragon boat.
And also like, how did I get here?
Right? It was just like this surreal moment being out on the lake dragon boating, and I'm like, I'm not even in my body right now.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say.
Beyond. And so we went so fast, and I remember like around midnight we had this big thing where we were like working with SOPA, which is like the theater company here.
Okay, yeah.
So it's midnight, we're out on a field, everybody's got lights, they're having a dance DJ party, and I'm photographing it as the midnight one. And I just had this moment where I was like, I feel like I need to lie down and just sleep. Like I feel like I'm done. And I still had until I think 6 a.m. to go. So we kept going, we were going through it. And then sometime between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., I passed out. Somehow I got to like Audra's dad's house in their guest room, and I woke up 4 hours later with like a gallon of water and a bag of almonds beside me. So then we took that one and we were like, okay, so that was like way too much. We went like way too, we jam-packed it.
That's true, yeah, full force.
We were not making breaks for like eating and drink. It was just bananas. So then we moved into September where we did it over 2 days. So we did 2 12-hour days.
Okay.
A lot better. Had a lot more time to like spend on the photos and like to do stuff. And then then we kind of left it for a little bit, and the final like incarnation, I think I'm gonna do something different again with it, but the final thing that we did it over a week.
Yeah. I was even gonna suggest one a month. Just one a month,
right?
And you know, get your sleep.
Right? We did 24 stories in 1 week, and I was able to like spend so much time with each person, and like
you probably like the art more too. You know,
you could really like engage with it. So we did one where it was like this woman named Britt. She wanted to talk about like unfolding, like kind of coming out of her cocoon and like becoming who she wants to be, or who she feels she is, or her true self.
Yeah.
So we like wrapped her in tulle, and it was like the sun was like over top of her and like glinting down, and she just slowly took off the layers of tulle, and like it was just so beautiful, and we had the time that we could spend and like really engage with that. And like I don't know, but I mean that's an example of like you have these ideas, you jump into them, you don't think it all through. You don't think it all through. No. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just have to get there, and then once you've done it, you can be like, hey, I'm gonna give myself the grace and the space to redo it in a different way.
That's exactly it. Yeah, and I was gonna say that actually you have to experience it to know where things have to change, shift, be different, and like there's no other way but like putting yourself in the situation.
Absolutely.
And then you'll know, okay, it's same with like any life lesson. It's like no one can tell you, like people can give you advice, don't do this, don't do that, but until you do it yourself, and then you're like, oh, they were right, but I had to make the mistake. Yeah. I had to put myself in that position to know that I can't go for 24 hours straight. Yeah. Maybe at 20, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like maybe we were like 19.
Yeah. Yes, I can.
Easy, you know?
Yeah, a lot of the things I did at 19, I look back now and I'm like, no, I'm so tired.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so tired
like,
all the time.
How did I do that? You know? Yeah, it's so funny.
But I think it's like, it's so easy to like live up here in your head about stuff. And I think that's like, so some of the stuff I do with the, like, with my counseling too is creativity.
I've seen that. I think that's what sparked that person's interest. Sorry to interrupt, but that person's interest that when I posted your thing or shared your post, that a girl I know was like, I need to work with her, you know, because it involved like these aspects of creativity, which, you know, you don't see too often. And I think that that's a really nice thing to be able to offer. It's not like just all about like talking and like talk therapy. It's like another way to express yourself. It's perfect for the artist.
Yes, yeah. And because I think it's so easy to like get up in our heads about like the work that we want to create or the things that we want to explore, and really get into this whole idea of like what is art, what is valid art, you know, and it's like, you know, am I allowed to call myself an artist? Am I allowed to call myself a creative? And it's like there's just all of this stuff that gets like tangled into it, and at the end of the day, it means that we don't create. You know, we're not giving ourselves space to just explore our creative selves. And so I mean, I think that's why that kind of like that interests me so much too, because like if I wanted to, I could live like way up here in this space and just not do the things I want to do.
100%.
But I'm very grateful to for my ADHD self that like I've just really gone full force into so many things. We did kind of like a retreat weekend too, like one time where we just went out to this like big huge house outside of Merritt, and like we just created for like a weekend. It was like a whole group of people, and we just like went out at dawn, and like there were photographers there were makeup artists there were people that just like love to model and that kind of thing, and we just made art like, and it was such a cool weekend. It was like such a cool experience, and it was all based on like, hey, like we're all here, let's just make this a space to explore what we want to explore.
Yeah, you know, and I think that being present and just enjoying the moment, because the weekend or whatever it is will be over before you know it. And so yes, here we are, and we all like these things, and we all want to be expressive, whatever. So let's let that be what it needs to be.
Yeah. I love that stuff. I just love it. And I mean, I'm thinking like about doing things like that in the future too, again, where it's just like what kind of like spaces can we make for just exploring our creative selves.
Yeah, and not overthinking too much that your plan you know, gets like even self-sabotaged or like kiboshed, you know. You don't want to like think about your stuff too much that you don't do it. It's actually a beautiful thing to like have the idea and then just action it right away.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I operate the same. Very similar. Like, I'm like, got the idea, I'm like, let's go right now. You know, like, I don't got time to waste.
Let's get this dopamine hit. Let's just roll with it, see how it goes. And
that's it.
And you might end up at like, you know, 2 a.m.
under
a street lamp with pancakes and just being like, what am I doing? What is happening?
Yeah, but it makes something worth telling. You know, if we, you know, you didn't do that, we'd record this podcast and you wouldn't have that story to tell.
Right, exactly.
You know, it's the adventures. The weird stuff that gives you something to share with people, obviously. You know? It's good. And people love and like respect you more for it, because they're like, Sarah, she's crazy, but we like it.
Right? Know? Like, look at all this cool stuff. Like, pancakes at 2 a.m. Yeah.
Who would have thought? Okay, do you have anything else you want to touch on or share? Is there anything that you feel that you, even wanted to mention in the episode at all?
I don't think so. I think we covered like a whole like gamut of stuff. I feel pretty good.
Yeah, it does feel very very well rounded.
Yeah,
for sure. We got so much in there, just packed right in, like so amazing.
Awesome.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing this space with me. It's been genuinely really nice to talk to you.
I've had such a good time. Thank you for asking.